So you see photos like this, and maybe you love them, maybe you hate them, but they're everywhere. They're popular and people want them. So you might as well learn how to achieve them. What's up? My name's Chris Tejas. I'm a photographer and videographer based in Ontario, Canada. I mainly shoot portraits, events, weddings, basically anywhere where you're probably going to be using flash, I am taking photographs. Direct flash entered the chat a few years ago and got very popular and has maintained that popularity into 2025. And I don't know when that trend will go away, but it's a look. And people have various reasons that they think it's become a look, whether that has to do with nostalgia, with like Gen Zs coming up and having seen those old photographs from, from the 90s that make them think of better times when they were little. They want to recreate that now. I don't know why. Maybe it's the point and shoot world of early digital cameras, but it's here and it's happening. And I actually find them really fun to shoot. And I think when you embrace them, it can be a great opportunity to grow as a photographer. But you have to know how to do them properly, and that's what I want to explore here. So we're going to go over settings for a couple different styles of direct flash photography. I'm also going to talk about a couple of really cool little flashes that I received recently that I've been having a ton of fun with, and I think are a great budget option to get into direct flash photography without having to go and spend the money on something like the Godox V100, for example, that I have here that I use for my professional work. Now, the basic principles of this will apply to literally any camera, so you don't have to worry too much about whether you're shooting on the Nikon ZF. However, one thing I will say about shooting on the ZF, as well as like the Z6 III or anything else, if you are using a flash unit that is not dedicated to Nikon, whether that's with Godox or Profoto or a Nikon branded flash, if it is not meant specifically to work with a Nikon lens, it won't necessarily recognize that there's a flash on it. The flash will still work. However, the exposure preview adjustment that normally happens when you install a flash will not happen, meaning that what you will see is still a preview of a photo that would happen as if the flash wasn't on it. The way you want to change that is you actually want to go into the starry night view setting, and you want to turn that on, and then that will disable the exposure preview, allowing you to effectively take photos and see your framing and all that kind of thing. The flash itself is going to freeze the subject, provided that there isn't too much ambient light that is getting in that is causing things like ghosting or smearing of the photo in some way, shape, or form. Basic exposure rules still apply when you are shooting with flash photography. You have your shutter speed, you have your exposure, and you have your ISO. The thing to note is that the shutter speed, the relationship from shutter speed to your flash is a bit unique. Basically, when you open and close that shutter, for a small portion of that time, the flash is going to be going off. However, for the rest of that time, there will be ambient light coming in. So what that means is that the exposure on your subject, if it is primarily from the flash, is going to remain fairly constant. So if you speed up or slow down your shutter, it won't really change it too much. However, it will affect that ambient exposure. So it means that we have to be a bit particular about our settings. The first thing you want to decide is whether or not you want ambient light to play a role in the photo that you're taking. So for example, if you want the background of a scene to remain a little bit lit up, that means that you want that ambient light in. However, if you want the background of the scene to just fade away into black, then you don't want to let too much of that ambient light in. An easy way to check if this is going to work or not is to actually turn off the flash and take a photo and just see what's going on. If you change your settings, meaning your shutter speed, your f-stop, and your ISO to a point where you are no longer getting any light in the frame, meaning you take a shot and it goes totally black, you know that the only type of light that is going to actually affect the exposure of your photo is going to be from the flash. So if you want to get that freeze frame look, start by taking off the flash, creating a black frame, and then use your flash accordingly to fill in the light. From there, if you take a photo and you have your flash, and let's say your flash is at full power, and it's still too dark, that's when you would start adjusting like your ISO or your aperture, things like that. But what if you want that super cool shutter drag look that you see everybody doing, where they take a photo and the person that they're photographing is like nice and sharp, but everything around them is moving, or maybe there's like a bit of like ghosting and stuff around them, or maybe they're even doing some cool stuff where you're actually getting double exposures in a single frame. How do you do all that? Keep in mind that for shutter drag to work effectively, there does have to be some level of ambient light or a light source outside of just your flash for it to really do anything. So what's a good starting point for settings for that? Again, this is so dependent on the flash you're using, on the camera you're using. Everything kind of comes together, the environment, all of that. But I will say, I think for shutter drag, somewhere around 1/10 of a second is good. I would say that you're probably gonna wanna be at like f8 and above so that you're getting nice, sharp, crisp images and you can be a little bit closer to people and still get everything in focus. And then you're gonna wanna just drop it into manual focus and make sure that your depth of field is deep enough so that you can get everything in focus. From there, your ISO, it's gonna range. That's the one you're really gonna wanna play with, maybe between 500 to 1,000, somewhere in there. But again, all dependent on the power of the flash you're using. That is a slow enough shutter speed that if I were to take a photo and then do a little bit of a movement with the camera, so I take the photo and I quickly just move around with the light source in mind that I'm trying to create that drag with, whether I'm turning and spinning or moving around, I'm going to get enough movement that I can get something really interesting looking while still being able to freeze the subject, because again, the subject is being frozen by the flash and the shutter is not really affecting that too much as long as you have the appropriate amount of light on that subject. If the ambient light is too high, but you like the look of the shutter drag so you don't want to speed up at all, that's where you would lower your ISO or increase your depth of field. Another thing to keep in mind is that what you're ostensibly doing with all the ambient light is you're doing like a form of light painting, right? Let's say you're photographing me right now. This is the frame and we have this little light here. If you were to take the shot of me using a flash on this camera, and then you were to quickly move the camera this way, that's gonna bring this light towards me. What that means is you're gonna have a streak of light that goes directly in front of me. You don't really want that. It can look interesting sometimes, but you don't want the light that you're painting with to get right in the face of your subject or something. Better off would be to take this photo and maybe tilt a little bit so that if you tilt this way, this light is gonna arc around me a little bit, and that can look really cool. Or maybe you move the other way and then that drags the light out of the frame. So just keep in mind where your ambient light is and how that's going to affect things. So I said we'd also talk about some flash options. So the first one we're gonna look at today is this tiny little flash that I have on here. It looks smaller than even like a trigger would be for a flash, which is pretty cool. It's from Reflex Lab. You may have heard of them. They are primarily doing film, actually. Like they're respooling, doing really interesting film emulsions. But they also have some flash products and stuff, and they actually sent this over to me. Obviously it's super small, but it's actually pretty powerful. I've been pretty impressed with the power output of this considering how tiny it is. But I don't know, it's pretty good. It charges relatively quickly. I wish it charged a little bit faster. And I will say that you don't get the most amount of shots out of it. The problem with it is that it's always at full power. You can't actually adjust the power on it. You're always shooting at one power, and that just drains the battery faster. So I found reliably in the real world, I was able to get around 150 shots out of this or so before I had to charge it. I could see this really like saving my butt sometimes if like my flash died all of a sudden and I just happened to have this sitting in my bag. It would do the trick in a pinch for that direct flash look. The one downside about it being so small and being so close to the actual camera body is that if you're using a longer lens, you might actually find that you get the shadow of the lens in your shots, but you would have to be using a longer lens than this. So I think like a small setup like this is a great little flash to have. The next one I want to talk about is this guy here. This is the Neewer Z160, and Neewer actually did send this over to me as well, so thank you to Neewer for that. What is cool about this is that it has that kind of small retro flash look. Like it kind of looks like flash bulbs on the front from like old style cameras. It's a little bit higher up than the Reflex Lab one, which means that you do get a little bit more clearance, so you might not get as much of the barrel flash look where you're getting that shadow. But it's still quite small. It's not nearly as small as the other one, so that one is still like the king for like tiny little flashes. But this one, what's cool about it is you can actually make a lot more adjustments on it. It goes from 1/128th all the way up to full power with 1/10 of a stop increments. So you can be at like 1/128th plus 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, blah, blah, blah. So it's really great for that. It also has an auto setting where it will basically judge the scene, and it's almost like a TTL kind of situation. So if I go to take a photo, it is going to adjust accordingly to what it thinks is best. And hey, look at that, pretty good. And when you're doing that, what's cool is that it actually also has like flash exposure compensation. So I can set it from -3 all the way up to +3, which means I have 6 stops of exposure compensation if I want to have it in auto. Otherwise, I can just keep it in manual and do my own thing. The other cool thing about this is that this actually can act as a slave, which means that you can set this up off camera as a secondary flash unit, and it comes with this super cute little feet for it. And from there, you can actually photograph and have multiple flashes going at once, where this will act as just that, like the moment it sees another flash go off, it will go off to get some ambient fill, stuff like that. It charges by USB-C, and it also has about 650 shots is what it's rated for. I haven't actually killed it yet, so I don't actually know how many shots it can do in real world, but I've been pretty happy with what I've seen so far. Finally, it does have a nice little modeling light, so we can show you what that looks like here. It is pretty bright, all things considered. Yeah, it's super fun. I'm really pretty happy with this. I think it was like a very fun thing to get sent for sure. But I do think I would genuinely recommend it. It even has like a sync port on it and stuff. Like there's lots of good things about it. I feel like they kind of crushed it with this one. So thanks to Newer for sending this over. Links for everything will be in the description, and I do recommend checking it out. And it would be a good first flash to have to explore that direct flash look. And finally, just a few tips when you are shooting flash. First thing I recommend, if you're photographing like a couple or a person or a group of people or whatever, let them know that you're gonna be using flash. You know, just because you know what a flash looks like on a camera doesn't mean they do. So let them know like, hey, I'm doing some direct flash here, if you can. It's not always possible. And usually places like a dance floor and stuff, people don't really care. But if you're doing direct flash with somebody and you're doing like a portrait session, it's a nice thing to let them know beforehand. Pay attention to your white balance. Now, if you're shooting RAW, this isn't really as big a deal, but if you are shooting mostly JPEG, make sure you pay attention to your white balance. Most flashes that you get, you will be able to find out either in their manual or online what they're balanced to, and then use that as sort of your idea, keeping in mind that if you're letting in some ambient light, that will affect things as well. And like I said before, make sure that you're thinking about whether or not you want ambient or environmental light to play a role in the photograph that you're creating. Decide whether you want that ambient light and then go from there with your settings. Speaking of settings, don't be afraid to experiment. Try things out, see what's different and what works for you. Try getting different looks out of your flash. The more you experiment, the more confident you're gonna get when you're actually going out and shooting a paid gig. So that's the basics of direct flash. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Is this something you're excited to try? Do you do a lot of direct flash work? Do you do it completely different? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Talk soon.